If you knew nothing, you'd think the mighty White Sox had collectively forgotten how to play. But then things took another twist. The gamblers, as it turned out, were just as crooked with their own partners. They failed to pay the players some of the money up front as promised. Feeling double-crossed, a couple of the Sox players decided to actually try again in Game 6, and the team of clean players and half-hearted fixers pulled off another win, keeping the series alive at 4-2. One can imagine the gamblers panicking. If Chicago came back to win the whole thing, those bets on Cincinnati would be lost and the players would have broken their deal. According to later accounts, threats were made. The mobsters reportedly warned Lefty Williams that if he didn't lose Game 8, what became the final game, harm might come to him or his family. Whether idle threat or not, Lefty got the message. When Game 8 arrived, the series stood at Reds 4 wins, Sox 3 wins. The one extra Chicago win had forced an 8th game. Williams went out to pitch like a man with a gun to his head. He gave up 4 runs in the first inning, practically serving up batting practice to the Reds. The White Sox went down meekly and lost the World Series 5-3. The Cincinnati Reds were crowned champions, but the victory was immediately tainted by the ugliest whispers imaginable. The final out of that World Series fell like a funeral bell. In the White Sox clubhouse, there was silence and perhaps relief for some of the fixers that the deed was done. They had lost on purpose and gotten away with it, or so it seemed. Outside the ballpark, rumors of a fix were already swirling among gamblers and sports writers. Even as Cincinnati celebrated, a question mark hung over the 1919 World Series like a dark cloud. The press didn't blow open the scandal immediately. Proof was scant and libel was a concern, but savvy folks knew something was rotten. The White Sox performance had a stink to it, one that wouldn't stay secret for long. After the series, baseball tried to move on, but the rumor mill kept churning. Throughout 1920, stories kept surfacing that the White Sox had thrown the series. Chicago's own club owner, Charles Comiskey, grew suspicious enough that he hired private investigators and even offered a reward for anyone with information. The White Sox were actually in a pennant race again in 1920, as if nothing happened, until everything happened. In September 1920, nearly a year after the series, a grand jury in Chicago convened to investigate the allegations. One by one, players were summoned to testify. Eddie Cicotte, feeling the noose tightening, decided to come clean to the grand jury. He confessed his role in the fix, tears reportedly in his eyes as he admitted to betraying the game. Shoeless Joe Jackson also testified under oath, admitting that he had accepted $5,000 from the gamblers, a fraction of what he was promised. Joe insisted he never met with the gamblers himself and that he played to win every game despite taking the money. It's true that Jackson's performance in the series was paradoxical. He hit a record .375 average, the best of all players on either team, and even hit the only home run in the series. He fielded flawlessly, throwing out multiple runners and not making a single error. If Joe was in on the fix, he certainly didn't play like a man trying to lose. This confusing reality is a big part of why Shoeless Joe became a legend. Was he a willing conspirator, a dupe, or a man caught in a moral bind? He had taken dirty money, yes, but many believed his on-field effort was honest. The truth of his heart, well, that remains one of baseball's great mysteries. As the grand jury did its work, the hammer came down swiftly. On September 28th, 1920, with Chicago still in a battle for the pennant, the Sox owner Comiskey benched the suspected players en masse. The team's chances died on the spot. They fell out of the race. Shortly after, 8 players, Cicotte, Williams, Gondil, Felch, Risberg, McMullen, Weaver, and Jackson, were indicted on 9 counts of conspiracy relating to fixing the series. Headlines screamed of the Black Sox scandal coast to coast. The sport of baseball, the American pastime, was was now front-page news for all the wrong reasons. One newspaper even claimed a young boy, upon seeing Shoeless Joe outside the courthouse, cried, "Say it ain't so, Joe," begging for denial that his hero had betrayed the game. Whether that moment actually happened or was fabricated by a clever reporter, it captured the sorrow of fans everywhere. Say it ain't so. Tell us this isn't real, but it was. The legal process culminated in June 1921, when the players finally stood trial. By a stroke of fortune or shady dealings, some key evidence, including a signed confession from Joe Jackson, mysteriously disappeared before the trial. Legend has it that the gamblers paid off someone to make those incriminating papers vanish. Lacking a slam dunk case, the jury ultimately acquitted all 8 players of criminal charges in August 1921. Shockingly, the men were found not guilty in court. Perhaps some in the courtroom even cheered the verdict, thinking these ball players had been unjustly accused, or at least that jail wasn't fitting for their boys will be boys mischief. But if the players thought they were off the hook, they had another thing coming. A very big thing in the form of Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Landis was a hard-nosed federal judge who had been appointed as MLB's first commissioner in 1920 in direct response to the brewing scandal. The owners brought him in to clean up the game's image, and Landis demanded absolute power to do so. Now he was about to use that power with a vengeance. The day after the acquittal, Commissioner Landis issued a thunderous statement that still echoes through history. In essence, he said, "I don't care what the court decided, these men will never play professional baseball again." Or, in his exact words, regardless of the verdict of juries, no player who throws a ball game, no player that sits in conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing a game are discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it will ever play professional baseball. With that decree, Landis banned all 8 players for life, permanent ineligibility from organized baseball. It was as harsh a punishment as one could imagine, but many felt it was necessary. Baseball's very soul had been at stake, and Landis, with the public firmly behind him, made it clear that integrity would be defended at any cost. The 8 men were out forever. What became of those banned Black Sox? It's a somber epilogue. Most of them were relatively young men in 1921, with plenty of playing years left, but they never got that chance. A couple tried to play in outlaw barnstorming leagues for cash on the side, but Landis quashed that too. He warned that any team or player associating with the banned men would also be banished. They were radioactive. Some of the 8 faded into obscurity doing odd jobs. Buck Weaver and Shoeless Joe Jackson in particular spent the rest of their lives proclaiming their innocence to anyone who'd listen. Joe Jackson went back to his native South Carolina, where he ran a dry cleaning business and quietly played on semi-pro teams under assumed names. He would often say, "I never did anything wrong to baseball," hoping someone might eventually hear his plea. Buck Weaver repeatedly appealed to Commissioner Landis and his successors to reinstate him. He argued he never took any money and was only guilty by association. But none of those pleas succeeded. The ban stood firm. The White Sox franchise, meanwhile, suffered a black mark that lasted decades. Deprived of 7 key players all at once, Chick Gandil had already retired before the ban, but the others were active. The team collapsed. The once great White Sox fell to the bottom of the standings and didn't win another pennant until 1959, a full 40 years later. They wouldn't win another World Series until 2005, 86 years after 1919. Some superstitious fans even muttered about a curse of the Black Sox, as if the ghost of 1919 had to be exorcised for the Sox to reclaim a title. It took generations for Chicago's South Side to heal from that betrayal. When the White Sox finally did hoist the World Series trophy in 2005, you could almost hear the echoes, the spirits of Shoeless Joe and his mates, perhaps sighing in relief that the club's long penance was over.